now have the plum-pleasing privilege of having a national partner on the telephone. I was very excited to hear. I think we all have been right along through here with this new normal, working from our home offices. We have seen and had the ability to make use of video conferencing at a very, probably more than many of us have done ever just in the last month or so since we've been working remotely, many of us have. So with that said, we're very, very privileged to have the CIO of Zoom, Gary Sorrentino, with us, and we're going to actually pitch it to him right now and thank him for being with us. We're very privileged.
Good afternoon. Good morning. How are you? Can you hear me?
We are great. Thanks so much, Gary. Yes, we can hear you fine.
Great. Are you
Make
going
sure we can see you. All right.
Can you see me too?
Yes, I can see you. We
right.
are getting ready to stop the share.
Great.
All right. There we go.
So thank you very much for inviting us. I am one of the CIO advisors for Zoom, and I think we have a presentation, if maybe you can share that.
Gary, I do not have your presentation. Let me make sure we have not missed it. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
You would think that I would get it right for the guy from Zoom, right?
That's okay.
Let me make sure I don't have your presentation, Gary. I'm looking feverish.
Okay. Well, while you're looking for it, I can start. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just to bring up some interesting facts, I wanted to start with this session about conducting business virtually, and let's put some misnomers on the table. My last physical presentation from Zoom was canceled, and it was a Chicago-based presentation, and Zoom had stopped everybody from traveling, and so I did it over video, where they split the screen, and it was me on one side of the screen and my presentation on the other, similar to what you're going to see today. And here's what I presented. It was about the culture and about working virtually. So here's what I presented. I presented that 70% of the workforce globally today works 1 day a week or more remotely. That 53% of the workforce works 3 days a week remotely, and only I said, 3.4 workers are full-time remote workers. And here's the real kick. About 50% of knowledge workers will work home full-time by 2027. And those statistics were gathered from various sources. Within 2 days, they all didn't make sense anymore, right? We went from a world that was broken up between remote access, which is, hey, I worked home on Friday one night. I took Saturday to do some mail. I had to take off on Thursday to help something out with the kids, to going home and working what we now coin as virtual workers. Today, life has changed, right? For kids who are now e-learning. Oh, that's great. Go to the first slide. One more, please. There we go. Okay, so life has changed for kids who are now e-learning, workers who are trying to be productive and secure while working home, and the way companies manage has changed, right? What we've noticed is, let's go back one slide. I'm sorry, go back one slide. Please. All right. So companies and employees were challenged. They had to figure out, how did we go from working inside of an office to working home, being fully virtual, right? So our part-time remote access solutions went to full-time virtual workers with no prep, no training, and in most cases, no plan. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so overnight, here's what changed overnight. All the rules of business and life changed overnight. Communication went from one-to-one to one-to-many. I don't know how many people on the phone are experiencing this, but I'm now on a Zoom call, probably from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. I don't think I've ever spent in my whole 40 years in technology, I don't think I've ever spent as much time sitting in front of a piece of glass as we do today. We also learned this, that we had personal tools that we started using for business. And we found that we had business tools that we started using for personal. So that whole blend of official work tools I use on my corporate laptop and official personal things that I use on my personal laptop, all of a sudden that started blending together as we all tried to find a basis for how do we work, but how do we manage life? And to tell you the truth, a lot of people found it very difficult because they were self-training their children. They were trying to get the kids onto e-learning, right? Work changed. I'm now working in teams. Productivity, deadlines changed. And all this happened while people are now working greater hours than ever before. The corporate computer, the office computer for the new virtual worker is literally on from the time you get up until the time you go to bed. I have my first cup of coffee in front of the screen, and whatever I'm drinking before nighttime comes, right, I'm on that computer. And here's the other thing. Our managers had to learn different. Most of us learned how to manage while walking around. We'd walk out of the office, we'd coast down to where our staff was, we'd have a little bit of conversation, we'd get updated en masse, sometime personally. Yeah, we still had one-on-one conversations. But now I have to manage virtual workers while I'm virtual. Everything needs to be planned. There's no more just walking by and interrupting people. Now we use calendaring a lot more, and we do use things in mass. The one-on-one meetings are basically almost going away. Okay, let's go next slide.
Gary, there's just a lag time. It's been moving. It's just a lag time, but it's moving here.
All right, there we go. We just kick it. It's technology, right? Okay, so let's look at the 60 days. Here's how we're looking at it. We went from what we know, let's just call that normal, okay, to what we didn't know. Let's call that now, okay? So in the 60 days, here's what happened. We're finally, after 60 days, figuring out work-life balance. We're figuring out how to get the personal life and the professional life working together, okay? We're doing more things in our personal lives. We're connecting with colleagues and friends and parents and children in a much different way. And 60 days in, I think we finally got to that plateau of we actually feel like the day will start and end on a positive note. Kids, pet distractions, delays on when you're moving the presentation, right? These are all the new norm. Nothing is frowned upon. I attended a CEO conference the other day, and they finally just said to all the CEOs, bring the kids, have them sitting on your lap, right? Because the kids are trying to learn at home. They're running around crazy. Rather than make them a distraction, let's make them part of the process, right? Let's not have people panic that someone's going to say something behind them and people are wearing different kinds of headphones and things like that. Let's just make that part of the norm. We also had to learn, besides working virtually, which is a big difference for some people, how to work securely. And then here's that. Then what's happened now? Okay, so we sent everybody home with no instructions. But now 60 days in, now companies are sitting back, and part of the company, you have to still run the company. Are people being productive? And if they're not being productive, how do we make them more productive? Not every job can go home. We did a presentation this morning with banks. You still have to go to the teller. Last I heard, none of the big banks are letting me go to the teller's home to take out $50 from the ATM. I still have to go to the bank. And so now we really do need to figure out a couple of things. What jobs can't go home? What jobs can be modified to be virtual? I was talking to a bank from the Midwest this morning, and when you walk into the bank, they have a kiosk. Basically, it is a virtual person asking you, what do you need? Contactless, not there, working from home. And if they can help you right then and there without you going into the bank to make contact with another human, then you're walking out without it, and all your dealings can go that way going forward. So today, companies and employees really need to figure out what jobs can go home and how do we make those jobs productive, right? There are just some job manufacturing, they have to go to work, they got to figure it out. But why does the office workers in a manufacturing plant have to go to work? And so we're all figuring out silly things like, how do I print at home? The president said the cost of money is zero. Okay, how do I refinance without a wet signature? How do I get a notary online? And these are all the business things that the world is working out. The other day we were on a closing and we had a virtual notary because now that's allowed, right? So everything is changing. And in this 60 days, we finally just got to this little plateau where I think most people are figuring it out. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, but here's what's going to happen. Now that we've got to this new normal, okay, so we had old normal, now we got new normal, but now the world is opening up again. Different areas of the United States are opening up again. Now we're trying to return to what we're calling the new normalcy. So we're moving again to something newer, something unknown, something we've never done before. The problem is companies are not going to move back in mass. Most of the companies we talk to around the United States, and the other young lady said it in her presentation, is it will be a more phased in approach. And companies need to figure out, I was working with one of the larger banks, and they decided that when everybody gets off the elevator and enters the floor, since their elevators were in the center, everybody has to walk clockwise. And if everybody walks around the floor clockwise, there'll be no running into someone face to face. But 3 months ago, we would have never thought about putting in the floor arrows, so people know how to walk. And the grocery stores are starting to change. You walk into the grocery store and then you walk through the produce aisle and you walk here. And if you forget something 2 aisles back, you got to do the loop again, right? So we're actually changing how we're going back. The other thing is this: some employees will choose not to go back to work. The kids are home. They have no child care. And so what's going to happen is we're going to have to figure out which jobs can go back to work, but which employees don't want to go back to work. And for a while, that will have to be clearly permitted. I think the other thing that companies are going to be challenged with is this. Think about your normal day 3-4 months ago. You had a great idea. You ran out of your office and you went to talk to someone about the idea and you conversed. Okay, in the new norm, there will be multiple people at work, but part of your team is home. They're a virtual worker. So you're going to have to run out of your office and say, hey, I got a great idea. But before I tell you, let's get on a video conference with Gary because he's not here. That's a new way of working, right? That's just a new way to say, how do we get the in-house worker and the virtual worker together? Because the in-house people are going to miss things because the virtual workers are working virtually together. And the people who are virtually working are going to miss what's going on in the office. And I don't think we're ready for that conflict yet. I certainly don't know that the managers of yesterday know how to manage going into the future. And I think that's going to be one of the tiers that is going to see a change right now, along with all these different technology things. We're just going to have to learn how to do two things. How do we become productive in this new model? And how do we communicate effectively? Because those are the things that we haven't figured out. We figured out how to work in this model, but just as we're getting used to this model, we're going to go to another model. So within a period of 4 months, we're going to go from what we were normal to where we are today to what we think tomorrow will be. And that's a lot of change for a global workforce. Any questions?
Yes, I want to allow for questions. Any questions from anyone? Gary, thank you so much. Sorry for that miscue there with your presentation.
Oh, no problem. It's all allowed today, remember? It's the new norm.
Yeah, I'm actually working from my Mac here and also my iPhone because the photos are just so much better on the iPhone than they are on this Mac over here. So that's what the lag is. I did want to ask you this, Gary. I mean, you mentioned this regarding this new normal in terms of how we're institutionalizing some of these things that we're learning over these months. In terms of what you all's projections have been, I want you to go back. We didn't have the slide with it when you first mentioned it, but 70% work 1 day a week remotely. That was
that was a January stat. January, February. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Right? And about 53% worked 3 days remotely. And when I used to do this in person, people would put their hands up. Now, most of the time I speak to technology people, CISOs, CIOs, and things like that, and they work, we have to define what remotely was. Working Sunday night to catch up on mail, that wasn't remote work, that was catch up, right? And that tool we used was what we called remote access. Today we're talking about, it's not about working remotely, it's about working virtually. You're doing your whole day, your entire job virtually.
Yeah. I want to ask you that just regarding any reflections or thoughts, because one of them, this is not, we have one of our micro conferences, this is large employers, but one of the things that has been so important to many of our large employers has been government, because government is supporting the employers, employees, and so many different levels, and it's almost like the last, the remaining industry as it relates to working remotely and some of these other things. I wanted to know what your thoughts on that in terms of government, local government getting more into working remotely, knowing that many employers have moved toward with knowledge workers and different ones have seen it at some level. Government in many places have not seen it at all for the most part. I'm wondering what are your thoughts and what are your reflections on that?
Well, traditionally government, cities and things like that, they worked, if you weren't at work, you didn't have the tools you needed home. A lot of confidential information, a lot of secure information, maybe a technology lag as considered the banks and some of the big industries. The banks and the big industries have been dealing with the new Gen Zs and the new millennials coming to work. And so that presentation where those stats came from was to convince enterprises today that the workforce of today, which is about 2/3 of the workforce, millennials and Gen Zs, wanted this. And this has been the biggest test for millennials. Because at the end of the day, they want it to work where they want to work and how they want to work. And there's always been that fight in enterprise, but enterprise realized in order to attract this demographics of workers, it's if you build it, they will come. And if you don't build it, they will leave. And so I think the government right now is lagging a little bit about that. I think that they don't really think about the jobs can be done remotely, even though we're proving it wrong now. And traditionally, it was more of almost like a regular bank. You need to come to work. We don't want people in the city calling you home. We don't want you taking home the documentation that you need to do your job. We're running on a lot of legacy technology and things like that. And so what's happened is, I think the government's got a little bit of a jolt because now they're having to approve things in record time. They're helping us bend some of the rules where we can now do virtual notaries. We don't need wet signatures. We can use electronic signatures, which 3-4 months ago, most companies were still challenged by it. And so I think regulatory bodies and governments got a wake-up call here and said, one, I don't know if we were as ready as the enterprises were. And two, we need to rethink the rules because whether we like it or not, we have to keep ourselves productive, right? We have to make it so that we're taking care of our citizens, right? And at the end of the day, though, they're not going to understand no because we're not ready. And they will figure out solutions on their own. And so I'm very much about lead, follow, or get out of the way. And if the government doesn't lead, we won't follow, and we will get out of your way and figure it out ourselves. So I think the enterprises were a little bit higher up on that. And I think some of the government needed to get up to par on that. I just saw a question about they like my background, and that's great. Zoom backgrounds are available. So what I will do, is, if you don't mind, I will take my background and I will send it to the people here, and then they can distribute it. There's been so many great Zoom backgrounds out there lately, and I used this one for, I just did a fireside chat with someone, and this was perfect for the fireside chat.
That is great. And Gary, let me ask you this, and we're not going to hold you, but we definitely appreciate the time. You mentioned this idea that if we don't build it, they won't come, or if they did come, they will leave. Regarding these Gen Z and these new generation of workers and them wanting to work where they work and how they work. Let me ask you this: in your view, what do you think? Where do you think, in what ways do you think what will stay, what will remain the same? I mean, what industries do you think are possibly going to be, as dramatically changed right along through here? Is there a particular industry you have in mind that, I know government is definitely one of them, but is there another industry that you have in mind that is absolutely rethinking their model in terms of how they've done business in the past and how they'll need to do business in the future? You mentioned banking. I mean, I'm just wondering, is there another one, or are those ones that come to mind?
Well, banking, I'm 40 years in big, 25 years in big banks and 40 years in technology for those kind of organizations.
Wow.
And think about this,
Wow.
right? Did you ever think that you would video conference the bank? Did you ever think
No.
that you could figure out a way to transact business? Remember, as we went through this pandemic, there was a lot of changing of accounts. Think about the legal industry. How many people updated their wills, changed their wills? How many people didn't have wills, right? They wanted to get their life proxies in shape and things like that, right? Their living wills, because when you go through this, you panic about, if I don't have those set up or I don't have those updated. And if you were stuck with the rules of, well, I'm sorry, but if you come in July, we will let you update that. That was unacceptable. You would go to another law firm. You would figure out another way to do it. And so I think today, banking industries, legal industries, knowledge workers, tech industries, programmers, developers, right? We're going to have to rethink, because I'm positive that the millennials that are interviewing in 6 months from now, the people who are getting out of college in June or July, right, who are graduating early, one of their questions are going to be, what's your work from home policy? How are you going to be set up in a pandemic? Why can't I sit here in Jersey and work for a New York company and things like that? Why do I need to get on a subway to do paperwork and PowerPoint and do things like that, right? So now the employers can no longer say, well, you can't work home securely. We proved that wrong. You can't work home productively. We proved that wrong. We can't manage the workforce if they're not physically here. We proved that wrong. They're going to win the argument. And if I was a millennial, right, I would probably ask all those questions. And for the companies that couldn't answer them or are not forward thinking, one, about the way I want to work, and two, about my safety and health, I'm not going to work there. And I think today, a lot of the millennials are deciding which companies they're going to interview. I think when we were starting in the job market, right, it was good to get a job, right? At the end of the day. Today, the model's a little turned around. Millennials decide where they're going to interview and then work backwards for there. And so I think that the companies that don't get up to the top of this curve and the ones that don't learn from this experience are going to miss out on a major job force.
Absolutely. Gary, remarkable figures here, and thank you so much for the insight. You've given us a lot to think about, and you know, the other piece about that is that if you want to be able to tap into the brightest and the brightest, the young, those who are young, the best and the brightest, the idea of remote work is no longer just it is no longer the exception to many, in many places. It's becoming the rule, and so we definitely appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining us, Gary. We appreciate your time. And by the way, the next time I have a talk with team members, I think I'm going to use fireside chat in the background you have. So I appreciate that as well.
There you go. Thank you so very much. Thank you for inviting us.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Gary.